Hi, and welcome to 5 Frames From. Today we're talking about the documentary Searching for Sugarman, which was released in 2012 and directed by Bendjelloul. Now, this film has been highly acclaimed. It won a BAFTA for the Best Documentary and an Academy Award for the Best Documentary Feature. It also opened the Sundance Film Festival in 2012 and won great acclaim there. Now, despite this, some reviewers and critics have criticised the film, suggesting that it withholds information about the star Rodriguez in order to tell a better story. So this poses some key questions immediately about the film and how truthful the film is, and how much manipulation of footage has taken place during the making of the film. So these are some things that we'll talk about today, alongside other ideas about documentary, including Bill Nichols' 6 modes. So my first frame today comes from almost the very start of the film, with this wide shot of the South African landscape. Now, this is already setting up this documentary as a bit of a journey, a sort of journey narrative. This shot comes after the image of a car kind of moving through the landscape. So we're told that physically our filmmakers are on a journey, but also obviously we've got this text here anchoring where we are. Now, this is quite an unusual start to a documentary. Usually we would expect to see some handheld camera, for example, a typical convention of the documentary filmmaking. But here we've got this sort of sweeping crane into this wide shot of this beautiful scenery. It's very cinematic. Often documentaries will start with maybe a montage of information or perhaps some graphics, something like that, that sets up the story. But here this has got more of an opening that we might associate with, say, a fiction film. Another unusual aspect is the location, because this stretch of road, Chapman's Peak, is a really well-known route in South Africa, and it's often used in car commercials. So again, it's not a location that we're used to in documentaries. Documentaries tend to be in people's homes. Maybe we have some talking heads, those types of things that kind of make them feel authentic. Whereas this, again, is a kind of cinematic element that we perhaps wouldn't normally expect. Another point to note here is the use of music. So we've got the soundtrack of Rodriguez playing in the background. It begins as asynchronous, but at one point we do cut to Sugarman in his car and he's sort of singing along with the track. And we could argue that this already tells us that this is going to be a music documentary, as the music is so prominent. Now, if we hadn't already got a sense of the filmmaker's interpretation and ideas, another piece of information that's really useful to know is that this shot, or these few shots, these opening shots, were apparently done 25 times in this stifling heat. So it just goes to show that the director had a specific image in mind and wasn't happy until he got the shot that he wanted. Now, again, this isn't something that we would necessarily associate with documentary, which are meant to be kind of very natural and very real, with footage kind of shot on the hoof. So really, already this is kind of setting up questions about how truthful this is and how manipulated the information is being. It also goes against modes like the observational mode, which is also known as direct cinema or cinema verite, where the filmmaker is really just reacting to what's going on. They're just responding to whoever they're observing at the time. Here, this isn't just about simple observation. This is very much about creating a stylistic opening to what's going to be a very commercial film. My next frame is from after the title sequence, when we're in Detroit, finding out about Rodriguez's background story. Now, it links to this idea of truth and also raises questions because it's an animation. So it's obviously been created specifically for the film. Now, one of the reasons for this is because there is no archive footage of Rodriguez at this time. So really this is working as a sort of reconstruction, as we would get in many documentaries. Another reason for using animation might well be financial, and we're told that money runs out during the making of this film and that the director has to create a lot of animations himself to fill the gaps. The style of this animation, which I have actually brightened up a little bit so you can see it a bit better, obviously is very dark and almost noir-esque, and I think this adds to this sense of mystery as to who Rodriguez is. Before this point we're told that, you know, he wouldn't even look at the audience on stage. So here we are, we've got this very mysterious man. So again, it's kind of building up this story, this mystery story, and perhaps attempting to add some authenticity to who this person is. The fact that Rodriguez has been animated with the guitar as a prop, I think, is significant. Again, kind of showing his love of music and the craft that he was involved with, him as a sort of singer-songwriter. It's also a bit reminiscent of music videos, because obviously artists in music videos are often pictured with their guitars, with their instruments, to give them that kind of sense of authenticity. So I think that we've got that here. And indeed, this plays a bit like a music video. At the start of this sequence, it uses text on the screen to tell us what the track is, similar to something like MTV. Now, this animated tracking shot is mirrored later in the film when we see Rodriguez walking in current day Detroit. And apparently Rodriguez is known to just walk and walk and walk. So this becomes a sort of motif for Rodriguez and his journey to stardom, but also the journey of the director uncovering what happened to this artist. If we were to link this to Bill Nichols' 6 Modes of Documentary, we would perhaps link this most to the expositional mode. Although there isn't a voiceover narrative, the images are clearly reinforcing the story that we've been told so far about Rodriguez as a mystery man. We might also consider the reflexive mode here and argue that Bendjelloul is really kind of playing with the conventions of documentaries and making us question what documentaries actually are. My third frame is much more typical of conventional documentaries. It's the talking head, it's the interview shot in mid-shot so that we can see the body language of the person being interviewed. I think what is interesting here is the way that the interview has been staged. If you look, the lighting is very far from just natural lighting. There's quite clearly some top lighting in order to create shadows, and we've got very specific mise-en-scène, all the different CDs and music paraphernalia in the background showing Steven Sugarman's knowledge and interest in music. Sugarman is a recurring character in the documentary, and really a lot of it is his story and his investigation. So again, he's there to add authenticity, but also to help push this kind of investigation forward. Just linking back to this idea of how truthful and how manipulated the documentary has been, apparently Bendjelloul did script some of the dialogue for the film and recorded several people saying the same story, eventually choosing the best version to go into the final edit of the film. So although we believe, you know, Sugarman's story and what he's telling us here, actually there could be some manipulation behind the scenes that we don't really know about. This is probably also quite a good time to mention this idea of the director withholding information. Apparently Rodriguez had already had quite a significant career in Australia, but none of that is mentioned in the film. Also, the film starts with the story of Rodriguez's suicide on stage that Sugarman recounts to us. But of course, the filmmakers already know that that story isn't true. But we're not told that until much later in the documentary. And again, that's about unravelling the story. For my fourth frame, I've chosen this footage of Rodriguez playing his gig in South Africa. I've chosen this because it really is a sort of happy end to the story. It's not quite the end of the film, but there is a bit more. But it kind of brings this journey, this narrative to a close. Rodriguez is able to reunite with his fans in South Africa and gain the success that he deserves. So we've got some proper archive footage here. We can tell that this is footage from the time of the gig because of the aspect ratio. It's obviously pre-digital. And this is one of a number of moments that are shot on a handheld video camera. So all of this adding authenticity and making this feel much more truthful than perhaps other parts of the film. The position of the camera, of course, puts us in the crowd. We're seeing over the head of all of the other people in the crowd. We've got this rear view shot and we've got Rodriguez in the distance. So it really makes us feel part of the gig. And again, going back to that idea of giving us a happy ending, we are sharing in the joy of this moment. An interesting thing about documentaries is that they usually ask us to form an opinion or take a side. We leave the film kind of more informed or more educated about something. And although we are more educated about Rodriguez and we've discovered his music, we're not really challenged in any way. We're not asked to make a particular decision about something. This is a fairly sort of easy to watch documentary, really, and once again I would say it's very much like a fiction film in terms of its narrative. So for my final frame, I've chosen this sort of home handheld footage of a protest against apartheid, and it's perhaps a slightly strange one to finish with because it doesn't come at the end of the film. It comes much earlier than the previous frame I've chosen, but I've put it here at the end because for me, perhaps it's the most important part of the documentary. Yes, I'm interested in Rodriguez as a star, but I'm more interested in the power of his music and what it meant for people in South Africa at this time and how it became a sort of anthem-like for people that were protesting against apartheid. The documentary then isn't just about Rodriguez. It's about how music can empower people. It's about protest, it's about a particular period of time, it's about censorship. There's that fantastic bit where we see how some of the tracks on the record have been scratched away, but it's also about what happened to Rodriguez's money and so on. There are lots of kind of unexplored parts of the documentary which make this intriguing and leave us with a number of questions at the end of the film. I think that's typical of documentary in that sometimes they tell a different story or an additional story to the one that was originally intended. That story may be more interesting or more demanding of the audience and provoke a different kind of response. So I hope you've enjoyed 5 frames from today. Searching for Sugarman certainly is a really compelling documentary. It's a great watch. It raises lots of questions, but in particular for us as media and film students, questions about the input of the director Malik Bendjelloul. When we consider that he spent 1,000 days editing the film, we can tell it really was a labour of love and therefore deserves the success that it gained.